Can't think of a better person to talk to right now. Former Secretary of State, former CIA Director, former Congressman, a West Point grad, Mike Pompeo, our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs.
So, Mr. Secretary, we've been talking about this for 2 weeks. It's now happened. I want to get your analysis first on the nature of this attack that Vladimir Putin has launched on Ukraine overnight, and it's ongoing now. You have met with him. You have been at the table with him and also with Lavrov, the foreign minister. What is your analysis of the nature of this attack so far?
Well, Jay, this is a big attack. It is highly complex. It's using every element of Russian power. They've used cyber. They've used air and sea. You can see the artillery attacks as well. They've rolled vehicles and land equipment. Appears that there's attacks through the sea in Odessa as well. This is a high-end, concerted effort to overthrow the regime in Ukraine. I think we've all seen this coming for weeks. We implored our administration to do everything it could to deter, change the calculus for Vladimir Putin. Clearly waiting to do the sanctions, failed to do that. But Vladimir Putin has made this choice. It's a war of aggression on his part, and he needs to be made to pay the price for that.
Do you think, Secretary Pompeo, that if the government falls in Ukraine, that's all Putin wanted, or are you concerned that this is just the beginning of a new style of Russian aggression?
Well, we have to remember history just a bit. He thinks of himself in many ways as Peter the Great. He wants to restore greater Russia. He's done. This isn't the first time he's done this, right? He dropped troops into Syria. He put private forces into Libya. He took Georgia, a piece of Georgia. He took Crimea. So this is part of a pattern. Move. See what the response from the West is. If the cost is relatively low, then continue the mission. The mission being creating of a Russian buffer space and the recreation of at least a faux Soviet Union. This is his legacy. It's what he's hoping to achieve. And to date, he has not paid a price for this.
I have a twofold question, Mike, and that is, one, you've negotiated with him. You've been at the table with him as Secretary of State. And, of course, you were also the head of the CIA. So I want our audience to understand the kind of person he is. And you just said he's trying to build legacy. So that's kind of question one. Question two is, this was a very calculated move that he made when he issued that statement, which was obviously pre-recorded, to saying it was a limited engagement, special operations in one portion of Ukraine, while his amphibious landing was taking place in Odessa and he was bombing Kyiv. So obviously Russian disinformation here. You've negotiated with him. You're seeing the tactics. What's your assessment?
Yeah, this is all is entirely consistent with the Vladimir Putin that I came to know. He only understands one thing, Jay. It is power and force and brutality. I was criticized for saying he's shrewd and cunning. You can see that. Yeah. It's not about admiring him for that. I despise him. He is evil, and he is now inflicting incredible harm on the Ukrainian people. They are the victims. But you can't put your head in the sand. You can't do what Barack Obama said. You can't say, oh, this is just the JV. You'll get your head cut off. This is a serious adversary, and we should have taken this more seriously. We now find ourselves in a place where he's on the march. Feels like he is in control, and we're still on our back foot. We very much have the tools to regain control, to use the great power status that we have to inflict enormous costs on him in the coming days and months, and if it's required, the coming years as well.
Mike, what does that mean? I mean, if you're going to put in the kind of sanctions you would do if you were president of the United States or Secretary of State, what is it that would deter Putin at this point from where he is right now in Ukraine? It doesn't look like, looking at it as we're looking at it now, we've done a lot of work in this region. It does not look like Zelensky's government survives in Kyiv, maybe in exile. But what are the kind of sanctions that could be put in place that would deter further aggression here?
I'm not sure that sanctions alone, no matter how stiff, can actually turn that trick. That's not to say they shouldn't be stiff. We should do every bit of that. I saw the Germans today say that they wouldn't support SWIFT. That's outrageous. We should do it. We should do it without them. We can. We should put enormous sanctions on him, his oligarchs, everyone who is in the room. These are human rights violations. Use global Magnitsky. You're familiar with that, Jay. These are powerful, powerful sanctions that impact those people's lives. But there's so much more than that. I would start with this. I would announce this morning, not that I was going to send a few barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's just silly. Let's put America's economic power in play. Let's go open up energy resources everywhere. Let's take the price of crude from 105 or 99, wherever it's sitting as we speak, and let's take it back to 52, where it was when we left office. That will crush his economy, and it'll help consumers here at home. It'll help people all throughout America. There are many things. Sanctions are just a tool. There are so many tools we have that we can use. He understands power. And by the way, one last thing, Jay, I would add, it could be that Zelensky will force the country. We should be very clear that he is the rightful leader of the Ukrainian people, and we should support him wherever he is. And when Vichy government is installed, Muslim government is installed, we should not recognize them, and we should operate in a way that empowers the resistance to that government every day until the cost on Vladimir Putin is staggering.
You know, there are former Soviet states which are members of NATO now. He's talked about in that longer speech a more expansive approach. So if this goes relatively easy for Vladimir Putin and the sanctions, like if the SWIFT bank sanctions aren't put in by the U.S. and even if they are, but there's not buy-in from the entire world, and he's already talking about building a pipeline to Pakistan now. The head of Pakistan is in Russia as this is going on to discuss that. I mean, could you see him potentially trying to endanger NATO member states directly that he believes are part of the bigger Russia and Soviet conglomerate?
During the next most likely place are the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. They're most at risk. His calculus will be much like it was this time. I want to get that back. This is an important part of Russian history. This is part of the greater Russian or Soviet empire. What's it going to cost me? What's the risk associated with my continued power? The risk that my regime in Russia falls. If he calculates that he can do this with relative impunity, there's real risk that he will move on and begin to nibble at NATO in the same way he's now consuming all of Ukraine.
You know, Mike, we talked about earlier on the broadcast, of course, you know, total disregard for the law of armed conflict, total disregard for international law, a war of aggression. I mean, I can make the list if you were going to the International Criminal Court, and I'm no fan of that court, to say the least, and I've appeared before it multiple times. But I say all of that to put you in to enlighten our audience here. You've been in that situation room in the White House. If you were there right now, what would you tell President Biden that needs to be done to protect the interests also of the United States?
I'd start with three things. First, the remarks he's scheduled to give this afternoon need to be to unify the United States and make clear why this matters, why it is the case that stability in Europe matters for us. And the reasons are legion. Second, as I said earlier, I would make sure that we are producing every ounce of crude oil we could, every cubic meter of liquefied natural gas that we can ship across the sea. And I would make sure that we moved heaven and earth to help the Europeans not be under the jackboot of Vladimir Putin's energy. Finally, we would do the sanctions. We would then demand that NATO do its job. Its central task is to push back against Russia. NATO and NATO's leadership needs to put its resources, its money, its soldiers, airmen, sailors, Marines on alert, get them ready, and make sure that there's no further aggression beyond what Vladimir Putin is already committed to.
Secretary Pompeo, is always, and especially at these troubled times, it's great to have you as part of the team at the American Center for Law and Justice, our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. I know we'll be getting back to you regularly as this continues to progress.